registered. So, but we suspect, like many Zoom forums, you register and then you wait for the recording so that you can do what you need to do. But we are very, very fortunate. So welcome to the League of Women Voters Bay Area Regional Issue Forum, featuring the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority, commonly known as BAHFA, and our discussion of the proposed regional housing bond measure, which will be led by its executive director, Kate Hartley. But let's set the stage here. As many of you who are League members recognize, we did our state convention, California State Convention. We set our big issues of emphasis, which were making democracy work in California. And we know that these are interesting times in terms of democracy and its issues, whether they be election or the misuse and misinformation. And that's a whole other forum. What we also had as an issue of emphasis was the climate change and sustainability resilience issues, and criminal justice, juvenile justice reform. And then there was the major issue of housing and homelessness that resonates across California in a variety of ways in our small, medium, and large communities. Now, let me look at that. What's the issue here? And it's a big issue looking for the Bay Area League. We are your interleague. We are the ones that since 1960, the League of Women Voters Bay Area. And by the way, let me introduce myself. That would be very helpful. I am Kathleen Shaw, and I am serving as the current president of the League of Women Voters Bay Area. And we have been looking in terms of setting the stage. Housing and homelessness is a critical issue. It's not just headlines, it's personal. It affects the quality of life in our community. The adverse effects of the lack of access to affordable housing are many and cross-cutting. It's a public health issue. It affects our economy. It's interconnected to our transportation issues, climate change, our natural resources. To give you an idea, it's very interesting to note that in the state's consolidated plan, they set the following housing and community development goals for low-income households and communities. It was all about to increase housing affordability, address and prevent homelessness, increase economic development opportunities, maintain or improve public facilities and infrastructure, maintain or improve access to public services and recovery assistance for natural disaster survivors. Equity and equitable is an underlying theme of this. Now, what is the impact of regional decision making throughout our 101 cities and 9 counties? That is part of what we are doing here at the Bay Area League, our regional study 22-24. And what we are looking at is our study on regional governance and land use. And it will be unveiled, that study, which is going to reflect many of these issues in June of 2024. Now, today's forum is going to be, it's part of a series that we will be doing, but this particular forum, it's about a next step. It's about a regional solution to the lack of affordable housing and how to support community efforts to build and provide access to all our communities of color. Now you're going to have, and communities of concern. You're going to have lots of questions. Please be able, you can use the chat, just put them in. We have directors from our Bay Area League monitoring that, and we'll make sure that they get addressed when the question and answer comes up. And the other is, which kind of brings us all around, let me introduce our moderator who's going to guide us through our discussion, and Ruth Roma Dawson, forgive me. Roma Dawson is our immediate past president and with credentials and a portfolio of expertise in issues relating to housing and homelessness. She has served and serving as the legislative analysis for the State Housing and Homeless Committee and is a member of the San Jose Housing and Community Development Committee. She will guide us to today an exciting look at California's first regional finance authority, BAHFA, Bay Area Housing Finance Authority, and she's going to introduce our presenter, Kate Hartley, its first director. I will now turn it over to you, Roma.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thanks to Marianne and Sherry that are assisting in this presentation. And you'll see some links dropped into chat. No need for you to copy or open. We're going to capture the chat and we'll send it along with the presentation slides and the video recording of today's forum. And as Kathleen mentioned, please enter your questions into chat during the presentation. And we've received some questions in advance. Thanks very much for your interest, and I'll weave those into the conversation. Do note that it's divided into two parts. The first part's just an overview of what is known as the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority, and you'll hear us refer to it as BAHFA, and it'll be followed by part two, focused entirely on the potential regional bond measure, and I know many of you are anxious to learn more about that. And I know some of you are new to regional government, and just to remind you, MTC is the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. ABAG is the Association of Bay Area Governments. It's now a merged agency and is one agency. And again, just as a reminder, you can always send us questions to our email address, lwvbayarea@gmail.com. So again, I hope you will enter. And now I'm going to go to the meat of our presentation, and that's to introduce Kate. And as Kathleen noted, BAHFA is the first regional housing finance authority in California. And our presenter today, Kate, is its first director. Under Kate's direction, BAHFA is emerging as the cornerstone of MTC ABAG's expanded regional housing portfolio. Previously, she worked as the Chief Lending and Investment Officer for the San Francisco-based nonprofit Housing Accelerator Fund, where she implemented a new financing and construction model that produced housing for homeless people more quickly and cost effectively than conventional approaches. Before joining the Housing Accelerator Fund, Kate was the Deputy Director and then the Director of San Francisco Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development. There she led a $2 billion public housing preservation and rehabilitation program that converted 3,500 rental housing units from federal to nonprofit ownership. She previously served in a senior position in the city of Berkeley's Department of Health, Housing and Community, where she developed financial feasibility analyses for new affordable housing developments, underwrote loan applications for new construction and rehab projects, negotiated for the city with developers, lenders, investors, and reported to the city council on all housing-related matters. Berkeley Mayor and ABAG Executive Board President Jesse Arreguin commented upon her hire. We're really fortunate that the smarts and versatility Kate showed in Berkeley will now be scaled up to the regional level. Her 3 decades of housing experience also include time as a senior development specialist with the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency, a financial consultant from the California Housing Partnership Corporation, and in general project management for private, public, nonprofit developers, and service as a financial advisor. Very important there, financial advisor. That's kind of key to the discussion today, as a financial advisor to nonprofit developers and government agencies. She holds a BA from the University of California at Santa Barbara and an MA in jurisprudence and social policy from the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. So Kate, forgive me for that lengthy introduction, but I wanted the league members that are here today to understand that we're hearing from someone with considerable expertise and years of experience. And now I'll turn it over to you.
Roma, thank you so much. Thank you, Kathleen. And thank you to the League of Women Voters. I'm so happy to be here this morning. And I just want to say, when I think of good democratic governance and process, I think of the League of Women Voters. Whenever I see your imprimatur on legislation, it always is a signal to me that it's a well thought through piece of legislation. So I very much appreciate all the work you do. As Kathleen and Roma discussed, the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority is a new agency. We were created by state legislation in 2019, specifically to work on better solutions to our region's housing needs. And if I could get the next slide, please. And also, as Kathleen mentioned, we are the first regional housing finance agency in the state. We broke new ground. Since the time we were established, we've been joined by Los Angeles County, the Los Angeles County Affordable Housing Solutions Agency, known as La Casa, has joined us. They're also working on regional solutions in Southern California. It's really a sign of the times for our entire state that we have to think differently about how we have been delivering affordable housing. Next slide. And I know you are very well aware of the problems you see and experience every day, the housing conditions that tell this story about why policymakers created BAHFA. Homelessness, 37,000 unhoused residents in the Bay Area in 2022. That number increased since 2019, excuse me. And homelessness is a direct function of a lack of affordable housing. There is no debate about that. But it's not just a lack of housing for the unhoused. We have done a very bad job of providing the housing that our residents need for a long time. Our regional housing needs assessment calculation currently is that we need 180,000 affordable homes by 2031 to meet the needs of our region. So yes, it is housing for the unhoused, but it's housing for low-wage workers. It's housing for our middle-income households. You all know the difficulty your school districts are facing right now retaining teachers. It's a critical role in our workforce. Teachers and healthcare workers, daycare workers. The housing prices that we're facing do not accommodate those income levels. And just one statistic to consider, the Mercury News and all the news outlets covered this recently, that in the Bay Area, among 23 to 35-year-olds, only 23% of those households own homes. And that is the worst record in the nation. And so think about the strain on households as you are in a rental unit, you pay your rent, it goes up year over year over year, instead of doing what previous generations were able to do, which in some cases there's, it's a, we have other issues such as redlining historically to deal with too, but to have the opportunity to have a 30-year fixed mortgage and build equity is so important for households. And that is really not happening in our communities today at the rate that we need. There is a good start. We have an affordable housing pipeline in the Bay Area. BAHFA commissioned last year, and we're updating it this year, pipeline study to see all the homes that are in some state of readiness, have some level of approval. These are developments that have already received some go-ahead from their communities that are in the local public agencies, 33,000 units. So we have political will and we have work ongoing. And what we really need are more resources. Next slide. And just to really bring home those issues, here are some numbers for you to see. It's quite daunting. In Santa Clara County, just to pick one county, we see 51,000 new affordable homes needed, more than 10,000 people that are unhoused. And in Santa Clara County, the unsheltered percentage of that 10,000 is about 75%. It's one of the worst rates in the nation among peer cities in terms of density or just population. But there's also 10,000 units in pre-development in Santa Clara County. And Santa Clara County is now coming off of the Measure A that produced some really fantastic homes to meet the need in Santa Clara, as in all the counties that you see there. New resources are needed. Next slide, please. So BAHFA can be a key part of the solution. Our mandate, as articulated in our enabling legislation, is to advance the 3 Ps. Those are production or new construction of homes, preservation, and that is to protect existing low-income residents in the homes where they already live from displacement, and tenant protections. We work in all the 9 counties. We are working on systems level change. We work in collaboration with jurisdictions. We want to, and we do, respect the diversity of the Bay Area. And we're governed by Bay Area elected representatives. We have, as governing boards, the executive board of ABAG, and we have a BAHFA board that is comprised of the same members as the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. We have so those boards give us wide representation. We also have the benefit of a 9-member advisory committee comprised of people with expertise in the field. And if we could get the next slide to see those members. I'm so fortunate. We are so fortunate to have the guidance from these members. They're really top shelf professionals, and they are helping us think through regionally the new solutions that we need. Next slide. The power of BAHFA, in addition to our 9 county revenue generating authorities, is really to think about things regionally. And if you're thinking about things regionally, then you have the opportunity to take advantage of scale. So at the regional level, at scale, BAHFA can become a regional lender. We will become a regional lender that will participate in the financing of our affordable housing developments. And over time, what that means is that instead of giving money and interest and fees to conventional banks, that BAHFA can take those interest and fees, and we can reinvest what we earn back into communities, back into the projects as subsidies. This would be entirely new. Right now, we work with banks, and banks will continue to be a part of the financial infrastructure, but they take interest and fees and they distribute it to shareholders. BAHFA will have a mission-driven lending activity and presence in the Bay Area. That means we provide new subsidies without the need for future taxpayer support. This is in addition to the other things BAHFA can do in terms of regional advocacy, providing technical assistance, creating regional systems. There's a lot of power in this 9 county presence. Next slide, please. And we know this can work. And the reason is that when BAHFA was created, we were modeled on the New York City Housing Development Corporation, which has been in existence since the 1970s. They started small with a $130 million bond issuance on a few properties in New York City. They have grown into a financial mission-driven powerhouse for the city of New York, which roughly has about the same population as the Bay Area. And just to give you a sense of that scale, between 2017 and 2022, they issued financing. They provided financing in at the value of between $1.5 and $2.7 billion annually. That is every year. And then for those projects, they reinvested fees that they had earned every single year between $100 million and up to $325 million. We do not have any financing entity that does that now. And that's BAHFA's goal. And that's something that we can achieve over time. Next slide, please. All right, so I just wanted to take a minute to talk about the process for building affordable housing, how you get from the idea and the concept of we need more housing to actually building it and leasing it up. This is just a very simple graphic that I hope can simply illustrate the challenges in providing affordable housing. So we start with the city or county zoning plan that says where you can build, what you can build, the terms of building. And then the developer, an affordable developer, has to go out when an opportunity for acquisition comes up. Rather than having resources that a developer can just use to buy that land straight away, an affordable housing developer typically has to go to a local public agency or a community development finance agency and get a commitment of funds or get the actual funds to buy that parcel. Now that takes time. And as time goes on, many sellers don't want to wait for the developer to line up the financing. So the number of parcels available to affordable housing developers, as opposed to market rate developers, begins to be reduced over time. But then once the financing for acquisition is secured, the developer has to go on to get the funds from public agencies to build the building. And that almost always includes a program called Federal Low-Income Housing Tax Credits. It's a complicated process. It's an expensive process. You have to bring in a corporate taxpayer who wants to become a limited partner in the ownership of your building. It takes a lot of work and a lot of time. And all of that is happening on a timeline that reduces the ability to act quickly. Once that funding is secured, however, then the developer can go ahead and build the building. But each one of those financing sources that is required to keep rents affordable, and I've seen developer budgets that have 8 sources of funds, 10 sources of funds. Each one of those brings with them rent requirements and other regulatory requirements that set the stage without flexibility. So if you're an affordable housing developer and you've done all this work to get to the point of starting construction, but all of a sudden your materials costs go up, the cost of lumber goes up, or interest rates spike, or you find some environmental condition that previously wasn't detected, then you can't adjust rents to accommodate those extra costs. You typically have to go back to the local financing partner, like your city or county, for more money. So you can see it's a high-risk proposition. It takes a long time. There's a lot of pressure on developers, and all of that is necessary to just keep the rents low. And then if you do have banks involved, which most of these deals do, they want a return on the investment. So that just puts more pressure onto the developers. And it's no surprise, knowing that process, that the typical timeline for an affordable housing development is often 5 or 6 years from the beginning of a site selection to actually leasing up. Next slide, please. But in the midst of navigating all that financing, bringing new resources to the table, working with developers across the jurisdictions, we are taking it all on, and we also are working within an equity framework. We created an equity framework as part of our business plan that centers equity in all our programs. We want all our investments to have this sort of guiding light in our production, our preservation, our tenant protections. We've created objectives and metrics so that we can achieve social and environmental equity goals. Next slide. And here you see some of the goals that we have. For production, our equity framework sets forth our goal of serving those who need it most. We also want to approach our work with a both-and effort, and that is, we know that we need to invest in historically disinvested areas. those areas often have been have felt the effects and are living the legacy of historical and structural racism. It's so important to think about those neighborhoods as areas needing an investment, but we also want to invest and provide affordable housing in neighborhoods that have historically been exclusionary. In preservation, the same goals. We want to prevent displacement. We want to serve those most impacted by housing unaffordability, and again, invest in areas that have been historically disinvested. Finally, protections. We need to increase resources for protections, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, but providing resources like simple rental assistance programs is a difficult lift because the Constitution of California prohibits general obligation bonds from being used on anything other than the acquisition and improvement of real property. So something so vital like rental assistance, which we know prevents homelessness, is not currently an eligible use of general obligation bond funds, but we'll talk a bit more about that in the second half. Next slide. So we have been busy over the last year planning for this bond, but also doing other work. We have launched something called the Doorway Housing Portal that is in partnership with the city of San Jose, the counties of San Mateo and Alameda. And this is really an equity effort to bring affordable housing opportunities to households across the 9 Bay Area counties from the convenience of their own smartphones or computers. Right now, if you want to find affordable housing in the Bay, you have to go building by building, and that rewards people with time and tenacity. It's very inequitable. The Doorway Housing Portal will change all that. So we've done our soft launch. We have listings up on the site, and by this time next year, we'll have application capacity. We're really excited about that. Our affordable housing pipeline, which I mentioned, is the updates underway. We're about to release a pilot program for preservation of $15 million with state funds. And we've also got a little program going that's that helps convert market rate housing to affordable housing, just with the assistance of a regulatory agreement from us and a minimal investment, that a financial investment. And so far we've been able to preserve 350 units with this small program. So we're really proud of that. And then we also are conducting a study of Bay Area evictions and legal services that is in progress. We have very poor data regionally about who's getting evicted, why are they getting evicted, and when and how. The better data we have, the more able we are to create database solutions, like things like rental assistance to prevent evictions before they start. And then finally, we're also really proud and happy to say that we are launching a pilot, a $5 million pilot of repurposed funds that we were able to secure to provide long-term rental assistance to extremely low income seniors, vulnerable households, people living with disabilities, that will prevent homelessness. We know that among unhoused people, the cohort within that group that is growing fastest are seniors. These are people who've worked their whole lives, but they may have run out of savings. Their Social Security payments don't cut it in terms of meeting the rent, or perhaps a spouse died, or there's been a healthcare crisis. So we know that with just a little assistance, maybe $500 a month, those seniors can stay housed. So we're really excited about that. Next slide, please. Oh, we're at our questions. All right, Roma.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kate. And we don't have too many questions in chat, so we'll move along fairly quickly. But before I start the questions, I just want to comment that we're very lucky to have Jake McKenzie with us, who, Jake, if memory serves me correctly, and Please correct me in chat if my memory fails me. I know you're from Roanoke Park, but I think you're a past MTC chair, as I recall. So we're fortunate to have him with us, but I want to correct or add a little footnote to what I said. Jake notes in chat, ABAG and MT staffs are amalgamated, but the governing bodies are not. And I know that we as a regional board are spending time, Jake, just to let you know, in the regional study that Kathleen mentioned of kind of trying to sort out exactly who is doing what now. And we are closely following several of the committees. And we had some questions about homelessness, but Kate, I believe you actually touched on that on number 5 on the RFP that's out. So I'm going to go right to another question that we got from Shirley, who says there's no housing shortage, but there's a massive surplus of vacant housing. And she's quoting some numbers from the 2020 census tract of vacant units. So would you like to comment on that?
Sure. Well, I'm not sure exactly what statistic that's referring to. There's certainly vacant single-family homes out there that are either owned by institutional investors or that are second homes or that are, for other reasons, underutilized. There are vacancies in apartments and condo buildings. Again, there are many people and investors who own multiple properties and may not be putting them to proper use. The city of, well, when I say proper use, we need more housing. So if we want to see our homes utilized, the city of Vancouver, for example, had a significant problem with a 0% vacancy just a really tremendous vacancy problem, but it was foreign investment that was coming in and buying up properties. So they actually imposed a vacancy tax, and San Francisco has pursued that action as well, just to try to bring those units online, or else create additional funding to assist in affordable housing through the tax. There are many developments in progress that are not in progress, but developments that exist for homeless households that have vacancy rates that are too high too. And so there are some structural problems related to our coordinated entry systems around the Bay, where the permanent supportive housing developers are oftentimes not getting the referrals that they need from the coordinated entry provider. And so those homes that will be occupied by unhoused people, it takes too long. So I know that it's a major issue that permanent supportive housing providers and cities and counties are working to rectify. And it's centered on this coordinated entry system that works better or worse depending on what jurisdiction you're in. But all of those vacancies really need to be brought way down. The institutional money that is going into acquisition of homes is a very different matter. And that is something that in many communities has created big problems.
Thanks, Kate. Here's an interesting question from Yolanda. Do we have a regional inventory of market rate housing?
Well, the American Community Survey every year does great work on number of dwelling units in each community, as well as statistics like the number of households who are rent burdened and the number of households who are doubled up and housing that is substandard. So there is good data out there that is through ACS. And also there's other sources of the state and local communities typically do housing inventories where they track their housing. So yes, that information is available.
And Woody has a question. He's commenting that BAHFA is a great idea, but are you saying BAHFA will fund affordable housing without utilizing federal tax credits? Or are you trying to make supporting financing more available?
Thank you for that question, and I'm really happy to clarify that. No, I am not saying that we won't use affordable housing, low-income housing tax credits, but I will say this. Right now, the system that we have is difficult to use and it's expensive. And we see it reflected in the cost of affordable housing development. Now, there's other reasons why our affordable developments and the market rate developments are costly to build, but the regulatory burdens that we put onto affordable housing development increase the costs. So we also have had in the last 2 years, between 2020 and 2022, we really had a terrible issue in the Bay Area with those low-income housing tax credits and the tax-exempt bonds that go with them being oversubscribed. And so the Bay Area's success rate in all the applications that we put forward in those years was about 45%. Very inefficient because there's no waiting list system at the state. If you put your application in and there's a whole scoring criteria and you aren't funded by because of being half a point below another project, it's back to the drawing board. You have to start from scratch and reapply in the next funding round. And meanwhile, construction costs always steadily go up. This year, 2023, we don't have that oversubscription problem, but that is largely a function of the fact that interest rates have spiked so high that a lot of the developments that in 2022 and 2021 would have been financially feasible are not financially feasible right now. And so it's a complex sort of fluid market. What BAHFA wants to do is this. We want to pursue more cost-effective housing. And the way that you get there, there's no silver bullet, but you layer on minimizing regulatory burden, streamlining entitlements, using construction innovations like modular housing when it's appropriate. Not every site can accommodate a modular development. And doing very, very efficient design. And those things together can bring costs down. So in everything we fund, we want to apply those principles. If low-income housing tax credits and bonds are available, we'll absolutely use them because that leverages our funds, and that means our money goes farther. If there's an oversubscription of those resources like there was between 2020 and 2022, then we are going to pursue non-tax credit housing development where we can fund developments just using our our subsidy funding and conventional debt. And that's a hard process to do, but we know that it's possible because there are developers doing it right now all across the Bay.
Thanks, Kate. And I have a question from Jean Perry, who actually is a League Bay Area board member who leads our Observer Corps. We're trying to observe some of the MTC ABAG various committees. Would you describe the profile of housing that could be preserved?
Yes, preservation is really so important. And there's 3 categories of preservation work that we want to fund. The first is the simple conversion. Well, it's not simple, but it's straightforward. The conversion of market rate housing that comes on the market through a regular offering to affordable housing. And the way that works is BAHFA will work with community-based organizations who are in the communities. They have great connections. They're talking to tenants, and we will provide funding for them to buy the building, rehab the building, and then put a permanent deed restriction on the building that will keep the rents low for at least 55 years. The second category of preservation is for buildings that have an existing affordability restriction in place already, but it might have been done 30 years ago. And when in many of those financings that carried a 30-year restriction, they're expiring right now. And so when that happens, it is possible overnight for a tenant with an affordable rent to face a rent that is absolutely not tenable for them. And that means displacement. If we can help community-based organizations either buy those buildings and keep the rents affordable or extend the affordability restriction for another 30 years, that's our goal. And then the third component is that we have lots and lots of affordable housing development out there that was financed maybe 20 years ago, and they haven't had access to new funds to do regular work, like they might need a new roof, they might need to upgrade their electrical system or their plumbing system. So we want to help developers in those buildings maintain good quality habitability conditions through rehab, well, in order to protect the residents. The whole focus of the preservation program is anti-displacement. Too many of our residents have had to move out of the Bay Area because the rent's too high. And so if we preserve affordable housing in community, keep our low-income households in our communities, it's just so great for communities and community stability.
Thanks, Kate. And I think we'll just take one more question and then let you go into the second half of your presentation. But we do have an interesting question here asking you to speak more about the mechanics of securing funds to help community-based organizations buy buildings, convert them to affordable, and protect tenants from displacement. And I thought that was a nice segue into the comments you just made. And would funding be available to assist community land trusts?
Yes, in our pilot program for preservation, the $15 million that I mentioned that we got from the state, it's not a huge amount of money, but it's a good start and it will help many households. But we're actually creating a set aside within that $15 million specifically for community controlled housing. It's a new model. It tends to work best in my experience when it's of smaller scale, because you really need, in a community controlled, like a land trust or a co-op building, it works best, I have found in my 30 years of working on these kinds of deals, if there are people with similar goals, similarly situated with economic conditions, et cetera, and really all valuing the different kind of governance that applies to a community controlled situation, as opposed to you are a tenant in a building that's owned by a landlord. So you want that great alignment of values, and we want to support that. And so we do have a set aside for those types of projects, and we will have a target set aside if our governing boards approve it for our larger preservation pool that would be funded by the bonds.
All right, you want to move on to the second half of the presentation. So next slide, please.
Sure. Okay, this is the question and how to meet the need. And we are working so hard on this regional funding measure. Next slide, please. It's a $10 to $20 billion bond measure that we're moving forward. And the actual value of the bond will be informed by polling that we will conduct this fall. And then the decision about that level of funding to provide will be presented to our governing boards. With $10 billion, we expect to be able to provide 40,000 new affordable homes. And you can double that with a $20 billion bond. Also, it's very important to know, and I alluded to this in my previous comments, our work on this regional measure is happening in parallel to a measure that I know that you are very familiar with, and that is an effort to amend the Constitution to make affordable housing bond financing a little easier, to change the voter threshold from 2/3, where it is today, to 55% or a simple majority. There is a legislative effort underway, which I believe the league supported, and that is ACA 1. And it there's lots of people working statewide on this. It's very important to go to 55% would be a similar voter threshold to what now applies to school bonds. And we've seen throughout the state in the last several years, many bond efforts that actually got 63%, 65% of their voters' support, but still fell just short of that 2/3. And so this would just be a more, in my opinion, a more democratic effort where communities are able to implement what the majority of their households, their residents want. Next slide, please. And this shows the power of this bond measure. Never, ever has every single county, our whole region, had access to these kinds of resources together at the same time. It's so powerful. There is such a need in every corner of our region. Every corner is getting crushed by homelessness. And this would make a tremendous difference. These funding values are based on assessed property values. So the money going to each jurisdiction is a function of what the property owners in that jurisdiction contribute to the bond payments. And you will see, in addition to all 9 counties, you will see a couple of cities in there. Napa County and Santa Rosa carry 30% plus of their county's very low income regional housing needs allocation obligation. So they have a very big need within their county to provide housing for very low income people. So they are eligible to get a direct allocation, as are the 3 big cities. So San Francisco, San Jose, and Oakland. Next slide, please. And our enabling legislation tells how, sets the stage for how funds can be spent. These are pretty minimalist for the county and city. Basic stuff. First of all, the most important thing to know is that 80% of any funds we raise do go back to the county and those counties and those direct allocation cities. So this is one way that our enabling legislation really respects the diversity of our region, in that the counties and cities are able to write up expenditure plans for their use of funds that meet their needs best. Within that framework, everyone is required to spend most of our money on new construction. So at least 52% of funds for both the cities and counties in BAHFA have to be used for new construction, 15% for preservation. At the city and county level, 28% of the funds are actually flexible. And that is another really nice thing for communities to be able to do. You could use it for production or preservation or housing related uses. Things like parks and infrastructure that are often hard to fund. The 5% minimum for protections will be a function of a constitutional amendment. As I said, you can only use general obligation bonds right now for the acquisition or improvement of real property. Part of that constitutional amendment effort that's happening to lower the voter threshold also contains there is an effort underway. It's not included in ACA 1 at the moment, but there is an effort underway to slightly expand the eligible uses of general obligation bond funds so that we can better deal with homelessness in particular. Things like rental assistance, we know it prevents homelessness, but you can't use GO bond funds right now. A constitutional amendment could change that. And for BAHFA, it's also important to know, in addition to those rules, that our production funding will be targeted as investments in every county. So we'll be looking at the county needs and looking to provide those loans and financing for new developments that are additive and advance the local goals of the communities. Next slide. BAHFA has pretty robust reporting and accountability obligations. We have to go to the state every year and make a report on our progress, annual audits, financing reporting. In addition, we will be posting our progress on meeting the requirements of the enabling legislation, posting it on our website, as well as the progress of the counties and cities. We'll include that progress to the state in the state reporting, as well as on our website. We'll be providing information to our governing boards on a regular basis. And we have milestones built into our enabling legislation that will review our overall progress. And then our governing boards will have an opportunity to change the legislation at that time if it is indicated to better serve the residents' needs of our communities. Next slide. There are lots of meetings coming up and lots of opportunities for engagement. This whole month coming up, September, and then through October, we're going to be presenting our recommendations for how BAHFA should spend our money in more detail. Things like presenting our priorities for production, which, as I mentioned, we are presenting to our governing boards the concept of prioritizing whenever possible housing for homeless and extremely low income households. Those will happen in September, October, actually through November and December. We will get to the point where we've wrapped up an expenditure plan for BAHFA. We have the polling data. We have the guidance that we've required in a variety of venues, such as our equity framework approval, our funding plan approval, our operational sustainability plan approval. And then by January, February of 2024, we will begin the process of moving forward a resolution to place the bond measure on the 9 counties' ballots. Next slide. And this just gives you another view of all that. So we're in fall, winter now, and we need to get the resolution and ballot documents to the registrars of voters for each county no later than August 9th, 2024. That's our final deadline. And so between now and that date, and then through November 5th, 2024, the election date, we'll be providing information, working in communities, working to finalize all these documents and plans so that we have a really fantastic ballot measure to put forward to our voters in November. And I think that is it, Roma.
All right, thank you so much. As you can all see, there's a lot of details here to examine. And just to let everyone know, because I've been asked this question several times, the League, of course, our reputation is that we do our homework, and we're doing our homework on this bond measure. And we are at the beginning of our review. And so please stay in touch. If you're not on our email list, if you're not getting monitor notes, if you're not getting our e-blast, please do sign up, and please take this information back to your local league. Now is the time to ask questions and make comments. You have the director here who will be presenting to the decision makers. So this is the chance to put in a comment as well as a question. And I would say, Kate, and I realized there were some Senate amendments added to this bill at the last, not at the last minute, but as it reached the end of the legislative process. I think one of the most frequent questions that I've received is, what's the rationale behind the 80-20 split? And why aren't you just giving everything right back to the cities?
Yes, great question. We are very aware that people want to know, well, why? We need the money. Just raise the funds and pass it through. If we were to do that, we would lose the opportunity to create BAHFA as a regional lending agency that is able to reinvest proceeds from the loans into communities as project subsidies in the same way that New York City Housing Development Corporation does now. That is a significant change. If we simply raise the funds and then pass through to cities and counties, and everyone remains siloed and does what they're doing now, which is good, great work, but it's not changing the unaffordability trends that we have. We will have the same outcomes. BAHFA has the opportunity to create a new funding source, not reliant on ongoing taxpayer support. And also, BAHFA has the ability as a regional lending agency to advance those better cost-controlled projects, because we can work in the entire region. We can be opportunistic about land opportunities that are lower cost. We can move forward projects that aren't subject to strong regulatory burdens that exist in some communities. I'm a former director of the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, and I can tell you that the regulatory burdens that the city of San Francisco imposes on projects add tremendously to the costs. And it's not that the goals of programs layered on to the housing development aren't noble. They have good outcomes. But if our goal is to produce more housing, we need to bring costs down, and BAHFA will be able to pursue those opportunities in a more free way than is possible at the local level.
Thank you. And also, we did have a question that asked how BAHFA is currently funded. Do you want to make a quick comment on that?
Sure. We got a $20 million grant from the state through the HCD, the Housing and Community Development Department. It was from budget surplus, and it allowed us to operationalize. Since that time, we have secured additional state funding through grant programs like the Regional Early Action Planning grant. We've been able to implement that program for the preservation without much money at all applied. We're looking at applying for a HUD grant right now, but we're working through the grant that we got from HCD for our staffing and startup needs. That's the principal source of our funding right now. And then once we pass the bond, there are administrative fees for both the counties and cities as well as BAHFA that will sustain us. But BAHFA is working towards self-sustainability as a lender. And when we become a lender earning interest, in addition to putting money back out into projects and communities, we'll be able to be self-sustaining.
We have a question from Jeffrey, who comments that he's working with groups concerned with the climate crisis, and they're trying to persuade municipal governments to have bonds underwritten by institutions that are not major funders of fossil fuel. How is that taken into account in your program, or how will that mechanics work when you start to actually see the money distributed? And if you want to talk now about how that will actually work, should the bond measure pass, please go ahead and add that comment in.
The underwriting of the bond, I don't have information on at the moment. We'll see what the market is, and we'll be working with MTC ABAG's Treasury Department and our CFO and finance departments, but I will talk with them about that. That hasn't come up yet. But in terms of climate goals and environmental sustainability, BAHFA very much is intent on making investments that advance our transit-oriented development goals, advance our environmental sustainability, So it's both locational and materials selections, and working towards a low energy consumption rate through the design and construction of the building.
Thank you. And I believe Plan Bay Area, I think it's 2050 we're on now, does comment and have some pays attention to the intersection of climate, transportation, housing. And so I'm assuming that those fundamental principles of MTCA BAG will guide BAHFA as well.
Yes, it's one of the most important reasons why BAHFA is a part of MTCA BAG, that the Plan Bay Area goals, which set forth the ways in which we can become an affordable, vibrant, connected Bay Area, and healthy too, involve the three pillars of mobility, transit, environmental health, and housing. You cannot ignore one of those pillars. You do so at your peril. So we are working with our colleagues at MTCA BAG, and there's great collaboration. And we are very intent, as I said, on making sure that our investments are fulfilling those Plan Bay Area 2050 goals.
Thanks. And folks, we're not going to be able to get to all of your questions, but we are going to follow up, and we'll collect all these questions and get answers to you. I do want to, we have a question from Jake, and I want to pose this since he obviously has deep expertise. How are cities able to work with counties? Mayors and council members in Sonoma County are skeptical. And I would say the history of the Board of Supervisors and the San Jose City Council has been occasionally fraught as well. So I'm sure there are other cities and counties that are wondering about this.
Absolutely. We've heard a lot from city representatives and city residents saying, I'm worried that the county as the administrator of the funds won't sufficiently meet our local city needs. And so we are requiring, as part of the expenditure plans that the county submit, and they must submit a plan that meets our enabling legislation's requirements. We have approval rights over that. It's not a qualitative approval so much as a check that the expenditure plans are in conformance with the requirements of the legislation. As part of that, we will be requiring demonstrated outreach to cities so that their housing pipeline, their housing needs are incorporated into the expenditure plan. It's one of the reasons, it's one of the main benefits of BAHFA's pipeline study that we're updating now. We know exactly where the projects in pre-development are, and we're pushing to have those the most shovel-ready projects advanced in expenditure plans. We're also providing technical assistance to county housing staff so that they can do a great job of outreach to the cities. So we're creating things like template PowerPoint documents, template city council staff reports. We want to see that there is good communication with and presentations to and outreach to all the cities. So it's a required part of the legislation and our funding guidelines, and we'll be looking at. There are several counties really out ahead of the game that are providing good examples. So for example, Alameda County, which successfully passed a bond measure in 2016, Measure A1, they had a distribution program which ensured that every single city got some of the funds that were raised through Measure A1. And then they created a regional pool to which cities could apply. And the first set of funding transmitted was based on population. The second was divided into 4 quadrants around the county based on poverty rates. And so it was this good balance of something for everyone, also getting more resources where they were needed most, and also letting cities come forward and just apply for the funds. But those are sorts of models that we're bringing forward to all the counties to say, look, there's lots of ways to bake this. Think about the equity, think about communication, think about distribution. And so we're working with the counties now on all those things.
And I have a question from Lisa, who is from Palo Alto in Santa Clara County. It said, if the cost to build an affordable unit using low-income housing tax credits is currently nearly $1 million, how can 10 billion produce 40,000 units?
Well, our contribution to those developments is not the $1 million. We're looking at leveraged funds across the region. So the divisor is not $1 million, it's about $250,000 per unit. So if you're a developer in Santa Clara County and your building costs $900,000 to build, and you get $250,000 from, say, BAHFA or from the county or from San Jose, then you have to go get tax credits and bonds and money from the state and maybe some philanthropic money, maybe some HUD funding, and it all will add up to $900,000, but that's not all being funded by BAHFA. Now, the reasons I didn't want to suggest that it's the low-income housing tax credit per se program that is why projects are so expensive. It's just a degree of complexity that adds to the degree of difficulty to produce affordable housing. But the reasons for those $900 million units in Santa Clara County are, number one, land is expensive. Number two, if you put parking in your building, it adds tremendously to costs. Number three is if you're building on an infill parcel that is very dense and you're going up high and you have a concrete podium, which you typically would, that adds a lot to cost. If you are providing housing for homeless households, you have some extra costs. It's not a huge incremental amount, but it is an additional cost of providing the desk 24-hour desk coverage space and the counseling space for case managers to meet with their residents and other amenities that make permanent supportive housing work well and work better. But those costs are high. But we can try to bring them down by speeding up the entitlement process, by having really good, efficient design, and by, whenever possible, using more innovative construction techniques. That's something that BAHFA is going to pursue, because $900,000 a door just isn't gonna solve our problem.
We have a question here from Amy. Before I get into it, I think you may want to also address the expenditure plans for that 80% that are developed by counties or cities with direct allocations. And Amy's question is, will BAHFA support mixed income projects, and what amount of affordability will you require? Percentage of BMR, for example, and will you focus on funding very low income, extremely low? At any rate, she's asking questions about supporting renters in the 50 to 60 range. And then she also mentions those that would go above moderate up to 120%, which I think is the cap for what we call moderate income.
Right.
Okay. There's a lot in there, but maybe you can unpack some of it.
Yes, absolutely. And again, thank you for the opportunity to clarify that. Every recipient of a direct allocation, BAHFA, the counties, and the direct allocation cities, has to write up an expenditure plan. The terms of the expenditure plan are included in our enabling legislation. It's not complicated. You basically have to put in writing what you intend to fund with that money according to the legislation. And if you know them, to include actual projects that you want to fund out of the gate. The requirement is, again, at least 52% of your funds must be for new construction, 15% for preservation, and then the 28% of funds is flexible. We'll see what happens with the 5% for tenant protections. Now, within the 52% for production for the cities and counties, there is a requirement that cities and counties prioritize projects that meet extremely low, very low, and low income RHNA goals. That is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation goals. So that is a way that the legislation will require that there's a focus in the cities and counties spending on those households who are unhoused to 30%, make 30% of area median income, up to 50 and 60%, even up to 80%. That's the low income housing limit. Now that's a prioritization requirement. So cities and counties can also include in their expenditure plan housing for people who earn up to 120% of area median income. That is the cap for the funds expenditures. In terms of mixed income properties are great, but you can't use BAHFA funds to fund the market rate apartments. So a city or a county or even BAHFA could provide an investment for a mixed income development, but the developer would have to show a sources by uses budget. That is, they'd have to segregate all the costs attributable to affordable housing and all the costs attributable to the market rate housing. You share proportionally the costs, things like the structure and the foundation and things like that. And then we would just need to be sure that all our funds were going to fund the affordable units only. It sounds complicated. It's actually not. All the developers in the region are used to doing these kinds of analyses and segregating funds. You often have affordable housing finance sources that won't pay for commercial in a building, but the building has commercial uses on the ground floor. So you have to segregate those costs out, and the developers know how to do it. So we do hope that we can participate in some mixed income developments, and we just have to make sure our money is being spent for the affordable housing.
Thanks. And thanks, Jake. Jake just clarified that BAHFA came out of Plan Bay Area 2040 implementation plan. So the plan has been in the works for some time. And I think 2050 is now having its first review. And we will send out information on how our league members can participate in that. We did engage in Plan 2050 during its adoption process. And the next question is asking, how can BAHFA mandate requirements, and are there any carrots and sticks for the recipients of BAHFA money?
Well, if a county or city does not provide a conforming expenditure plan, then they will not be in receipt of the money. It's pretty straightforward. And then if we won't be putting all the money out the door in one big chunk, we will be issuing in pieces, because we don't want to have funds that are going unused. We want to distribute the funds at the same cadence of the cities and counties' ability to spend those funds. So if a jurisdiction received their allocation in the first issuance of bonds and then didn't do what it was supposed to do with those funds, that would be very problematic and affect their receipt of the second issuance funds. And there's causes of action. This is all pursuant to legislation. And so the cities and counties don't have the ability to not follow that legislation with impunity. So we believe that we have really great partners. I've been so gratified to work with staff and elected officials from all over the region on these issues, and everyone is very understanding of the requirements of the enabling legislation, and they all want to address these housing needs. Everyone has the need for more affordable housing in their community. So I don't anticipate anyone going rogue, so to speak, with these funds.
Okay, yeah, hopefully not. Kate, I had a question to ask. What's going to be the decision points between whether you do a $10 million bond or a $20 million bond, and how can the public, you put up a list of meetings that are forthcoming, and league folks, we will keep you apprised. And of course, anybody's welcome to make a comment. Could you just comment about how that process is going to unfold over the next few months?
Yes, we will be polling this fall, and then our formal process for advancing the resolution to put the measure on the ballot will begin in February 2024. And it will be in that space, that first quarter of 2024, with the benefit of the polling data, that our governing board members will make the decision about what is the appropriate amount. It could be 10 billion or 20 billion. It could be 15 billion. So that is the process. All of that analysis and presentation work is open to the public. And so we encourage people to attend the meetings and participate and talk to your elected representatives who are on ABAG executive board or the BAHFA board.
Thank you very much. And again, we encourage everybody to send us comments about this bond measure, and we will get information to you, because we are observing many of the MTC ABAGs. I believe it's the BAHFA Oversight Board and the ABAG Executive Committee. If you could just give us the names of those committees that are the key decision makers.
Yes, the process is on all our big decision making. We go first to our advisory committee, and you saw that group of people. We then go to the joint housing committees for ABAG and MTC or BAHFA. That is the ABAG Housing Committee and the BAHFA Oversight Committee. There's typically very robust conversation at that joint housing committee meeting because it's a smaller group of people. And so there's really an opportunity to vet issues and question staff. Sometimes it's grilling staff. And the public is welcome to participate. So that's a great meeting to tune into. And then by the time we get to the BAHFA board and the ABAG executive board, we've tried to resolve some of the conflicts that arose in the housing committee meeting. And so those meetings can be a little smoother, but not always. But that's where the final decision making happens. So the preliminary analysis at the joint housing committees is a good thing to tune into.
Thank you. And again, I said we have Jean Perry here on this call with us. And if any of you are interested in becoming observers, I'm sure you all know what league observers do, and we'll provide training if you don't. But we do want to be watchful of some of these committees, because there is more and more attention to what's going on at a regional level. And many of us in leagues work at our local level with our local city councils mostly. So sometimes the big picture at a regional level is not something we pay attention to. So League Bay Area Board is hoping to keep you informed. And we've got time for just a few more questions. And I'm just going to summarize quickly because I believe you've already done some work on this. We had a question about, is there anything that BAHFA will do to help decrease the cost of construction? And I'm summarizing about 4 questions altogether there, Kate.
Yes, we are as I mentioned, we have done a lot of analysis. We're looking at developments right now, going up right now in the Bay Area that have great cost control measures in place. We're touring them. We're talking to architects. We're talking to developers. I have experience myself in my bio. The Housing Accelerator Fund was able to build a 146 unit building of permanent supportive housing at approximately $400,000 per unit, because that was our mission. We had been given philanthropic funds for the sole purpose of beating the cost and time norms, and we did. So we're going to do that again, but it's complicated. It's the entitlement process, it's construction, it's design, it's regulatory burden, and it's the cost of land. And it's picking a site. You will not meet cost and time problems if, for example, you pick a site that is a huge brownfield. You have to do tons of environmental remediation. Now, that's something that should be done, but if our goal is to get affordable housing built quickly, that might not be the best site to invest in. So we're going to have to make hard decisions like that, but we're very intent on becoming a leader to bring these models to the region, because again, we're not going to solve our problem if we are only building at $1 million a unit, and we're not, fortunately. So and that's not to disparage the developments that are coming in high. And let me just give one example where it's understandable. In San Francisco, it was a very racist act back in the 50s and 60s. All the public housing, not all, but large public housing developments were built on the outskirts of the city without great infrastructure, with no access to good transit, and they were racially segregated. There were what they called neighborhood covenants, so that in some of the developments, you couldn't live there unless you were African American. And the housing was dilapidated, and it became dilapidated. And so the city of San Francisco made a commitment to rebuild those housing developments in a high quality way without displacing residents. Well, they had to build new roads, new sewers, new plumbing lines, new everything. They had to get transit out there. There was so much work to do. And those units came in at about $1 million a unit, but that was necessary because it rectified a historical wrong. So we just have to create that balance and put our resources where they're needed most, but also create new systems so we can do better.
Thanks, Kate. And again, we have a lot of questions we're not going to get to, but again, as Kathleen said, we are planning follow-up programs, and we'll get to some of these questions. But just to close, I want to remind everyone we put a lot of links in the chat for you, and we'll be sending the chat out if you want to dive in a little deeper. I highly recommend Bay Area Housing for All.org, frequently asked questions. And just in close, we have a question about what will be the impact on the tax bill. And another question that maybe you want to close out on, Kate, is how do we answer the person who says, why should we pay for affordable housing? Great way to wrap it up. The first is that the tax impact, and we're very respectful of our property owners. We want to make it manageable. We know that for some people it's a hardship, but it's going to be a function of interest rates at the time of the issuance and how fast we get our money out. In the analysis that we have done to date, using typical assumptions now, it will cost a property owner of a property that with an assessed value of about $1 million, about $100 a year. And remember, assessed value is different than market value. So if you've been a long-term property owner, your assessed value is probably a lot lower than your
market value. The reason that this is so important is that these issues affect us all. Homelessness is the humanitarian crisis of our time in California. No one is unaffected by people living on our streets. And if you're like me and your adult children have moved away, I sure miss them. I would like them to stay here, but they want to own a home someday. Businesses can't attract and retain workers if no one can afford to live near the business. It's a question of humanitarianism and economic vibrancy. It affects everyone. So it's important that we come together, pool our resources, and create the housing that we need, because we haven't done that for about 50 years. And so we have some catching up to do.
Thank you very much, Kate. And League of Women Voters, again, things when we evaluate as the bond measure unfolds, DEI, equity are important to us. And most folks think of League as voting issues. Voter education is our wheelhouse. We also have strong fiscal positions. So we'll be looking at audits and accountability and those kinds of things. And now, since we are out of time, I want to turn this quick. Thank you so much, Kate. We greatly appreciate your time. And also thank Irene, who I saw in the chat, for her help in pulling all this together. So thank you and your staff. And also let me turn it back to Kathleen real quickly for some closing remarks.
Well, my closing remarks have to do with real kudos. Thank you very much. Thank you, BAHFA. And thank you for all that you are attending, because we together are going to make the difference. We're going to be able to and come up with the ways to, in a sense, the solutions. It's our voices and our actions that actually move these solutions forward. I have to make a note, Women's Equality Day is tomorrow. I love, frankly, the way that our league, National League and others actually call it Women's Inequality Day, because we have some real issues out there. Everything from voting rights, ERA, our reproductive health issues, and public safety. There is just some issues out there that we are all together. And frankly, inequality affects men and women. You have to be able to do the best. So I just had to do that shout out about August 26th. And to say again, reiterate, we will be sending you all of these things, and you'll have much more opportunity. And this is just the beginning of our series of regional issue forums. Look for not only more on this issue, but also we'll be doing a whole series on public health and public safety that I think you will find really important. So have a good day and a welcome to the end of Friday and a good weekend ahead.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for the work you do. You're amazing.
Thank you, everybody. It's been a grand time.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Jake, thank you for attending. And I'm sure we would love to have a chat with you at some point. Kathleen is retired from ABAG, and we are updating our regional government position. So maybe we could have a chat sometime with our little committee working
Well, I'm available to be chatted with.
on. Okay, thank you so very much.
We'll look forward to it. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
You will.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.